Okay, Srimad Bhagvatam, Canto 6, Chapter 7, Text 39. Suradhvisham Shriyam Guptam Osha Nasyapi Vidyaya Achchidhyadhan Mahindraya Vaishnavya Vidyaya Vibhu. Okay, Hare Krishna. Suradvisham Shriyam Guptam Osha Nasyapi Vidyaya Achchidhyadhan Mahindraya Vaishnavya Vidyaya Vibhu. Suradvisham Shriyam Guptam Osha Nasyapi Vidyaya Achchidhyadhan Mahindraya Vaishnavya Vidyaya Vibhu. Mothers. Suradvisham Shriyam Guptam Osha Nasyapi Vidyaya Achchidhyadhan Mahindraya Vaishnavya Vidyaya Vibhu. Suradvisham, of the enemies of the demigods, Shriyam, the opulence, Guptam, protected, Oshanasya, of Shukracharya, Api, although, Vidyaya, by the talents, Achchidya, collecting, Adhat, delivered, Maha Indraya, unto King Indra, Vaishnavya, of Lord Vishnu, Vidyaya, by a prayer, Vibhu, the most powerful Vishwarupa. Translation for Purport Srila Prabhupada Ki Jaya. Translation: the opulence of the demons, who are generally known as the enemies of the demigods, was protected by the talents and tactics of Shukracharya. But Vishwarupa, who was most powerful, composed a protective prayer known as the Narayan Kavacha. By this intelligent mantra, he took away the opulence of the demons and gave it to Mahindra, the king of heaven. Purport: the distinction between the demigods, devas, and demons, asuras, is that the demigods are all devotees of Lord Vishnu, whereas the demons are devotees of demigods like Lord Shiva, goddess Kali, and goddess Durga. Sometimes the demons are also devotees of Lord Brahma. For example, Hiranyakashipu was a devotee of Lord Brahma, Ravana was a devotee of Lord Shiva, and Mahishasura was a devotee of goddess Durga. The demigods are devotees of Lord Vishnu, Vishnu Bhakta Shmito Dhaiva. Whereas the demons, asuras tat viparyaya, are always against the Vishnu Bhaktas or Vaishnavas. To oppose the Vaishnavas, the demons become devotees of Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, Kali, Durga, and so on. In the days of yore, many long years ago, there was animosity between the devas and the asuras, and the same spirit still continues. For the devotees of Lord Shiva and goddess Durga are always envious of Vaishnavas, who are devotees of Lord Vishnu. This strain between the devotees of Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu has always existed. In the higher planetary systems, fights between the demons and the demigods continue for a long, long time. Herein we see that Vishwarupa made for the demigods a protective covering, saturated with a Vishnu mantra. Sometimes the Vishnu mantra is called Vishnu Dwara, and the Shiva mantra is called Shiva Dwara. We find in the Shastras that sometimes the Shiva Dwara and the Vishnu Dwara are employed in the fights between the demons and the demigods. The word Suradvisham, which in this verse means of the enemies of the demigods, also refers to the atheists. Srimad Bhagvatam elsewhere says that Lord Buddha appeared for the purpose of bewildering the demons or atheists. The Supreme Personality of Godhead always awards his benediction to devotees. The Lord himself confirms this in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 31. Konteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashiti. Quote, O son of Kunti, declare boldly that my devotee never perishes. End quote. Srila Prabhupada ki Jaya. Then the last verse of the chapter, Vishwarupa, who was most liberal, spoke to King Indra, Sahasraksha, the secret hymn that protected Indra and conquered the military power of the demons. Thus, in the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 6th canto, 7th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Indra offends his spiritual master Brihaspati. So, Srila Prabhupada is basically saying this purport that there are two types of living entities in the material world. Those who are godly, sura, and those who are not godly, asura, or demons. The word demon literally, the word asura means not godly, or demons. So these are the only two types of living entities that exist in the material world, broadly speaking. So Prabhupada is quoting this verse in the purport, Vishnu Bhakta Shmito Dhaiva Asuras Taviparyaya. The nature of the demons is they do is exactly opposite whatever the devotees are doing. That's the nature of the demons. A nice pastime is there in the 8th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam with the churning of the milk ocean. Many of you are familiar with that Leela. There, they needed Vasuki as the rope to churn the, the mountain, Mandara mountain, for getting the nectar out of the milk ocean. So that time, the Devas hadn't taken shelter of Vishnu. Vishnu was assisting the Devas. And so when they took the rope of Vasuki, Vishnu said, let me take the face of Vasuki. Vasuki is like a snake. He's a type of snake, a long snake that was used as a rope. So he said, let me take the face of Vasuki. But the demons were thinking, oh, why is Vishnu taking... And Vishnu knew also the demons were thinking this way, because the demons think exactly opposite of whatever the devotees are doing. So Vishnu made a little trick. He said, let me take the face of Vasuki. So the demons were thinking, oh, why you want to take the face? Because that is advantageous. The demons were thinking this way. And Vishnu knew that they were thinking this way. So Vishnu said, okay, fine, you take the face only. Yeah, we want the face, Now the foolish, Vasuki breathes fire. So why would you want the face of Vasuki? But Vishnu knew that the demons do whatever opposite the devotees are doing. So he took the face. They said, we want the face only. So Vishnu said, fine, take it. So when they were churning the mountain, then Vasuki started breathing fire and all the demons were suffering like anything. And the devas were laughing. So these are the two types of living entities in the material world. And Prabhupada is quoting this verse here, Vishnu Bhakta Shmito Daiva Asurasta Viparya. Viparya means just the opposite. The nature of the devotee is to take refuge in the Supreme Lord, and the nature of the demon is to do just the opposite of that. Anything that the devotee is doing, the demon will do opposite of that. So Prabhupada is quoting this verse here. So the demons are take shelter of various material deities according to how the modes of material nature are affecting them. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Kaimaish Taishter Hitagana, Prapadinte Anya Devataha. Speaking of the materialistic mentality, Krishna mentions that materialists or non-godly persons, especially in context here, their knowledge is stolen by kama. Their knowledge is stolen by material desires, kama. Krishna speaks about kama in the Bhagavad Gita as benighting. You know this word benighting? I've been mentioning it. Benighting means to make dark. So the more kama there is, the more ignorant one becomes. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, as fire is covered by smoke, as the mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, so the living entity is covered by different degrees of kama. Understand? So that means according to the severity of the kama, to that degree one becomes ignorant. Here Krishna is more or less equating ignorance and kama, lust. So fire covered by smoke means severe. But there's still some hope. That's like the human form of life. A mirror covered by the dust means more severe. That's like animal form of life. And then an embryo covered by the womb, a completely helpless condition, is most severe. That's like living entities trapped in tree bodies, so it's, where there's hardly any exhibition of consciousness whatsoever. For example, so the more there is karma, the more there is ignorance, or the more one becomes benighted, or the light of wisdom becomes covered by karma. So Krishna speaks of karmaish taishtera hitagana, that the demons or materialistic persons, their knowledge is stolen by karma. And according to the degree of karma, to that degree, their knowledge is covered or blocked. And as a result of being ignorant, prapadyante anya devata, they take shelter of material deities. So Prabhupada is mentioning in the purport here various demigods like Durga, Kali, etc. They take shelter of various material deities. This is the idea here. Tam tam niyamamastaya, and they apply the rules of worship pakrita niyatasvaya, according to how the modes of nature are influencing them. So I know a lot of people in the material world, even us, I would suspect, think that we're making decisions based on, great thoughtfulness, and I think I really like this one and I don't really like that one. And we really feel that we're independent doers. This is where Krishna says, ahankara vimudatma, you're all fools. You're all foolish and rascals. Because your decisions are not actually based on really your deep thoughtfulness and so on, but it's based on how you're being influenced by the modes of nature at a particular time. Does it make sense? So no one is really making an independent decision in this world. That's the whole illusion of the whole affair, that you think that you're acting independently. That's what Krishna says is foolish. Ahankara vimudatma. You're not acting independently. Just like sometimes you get a really good idea. You think like this, oh, I got a really good idea. Question, where did that idea come from? Huh? It's just inspiration. It just came up in my mind. What were you doing at the time? I was drinking, and then, or whatever. The modes of material nature are influencing the way you're coming to those decisions. So similarly, the types of deities people take shelter of, either they be political leaders. Srila Prabhupada speaks about someone worshiping Hitler in the Bhagavad Gita, or whoever it is, someone, or even some various devatas. Why is it that one person chooses to take shelter of this deity as opposed to that deity? It's because of the influence of the modes of material nature. Pakrita niyatasvaya, Krishna makes this point. So if you're in the mode of ignorance, you take shelter of mode of ignorant deities such as hobgoblins, ghosts, spirits, because the age of Kali is the age of Kali. So you find that the most popular TV shows and movies are all the ones that deal with like hobgoblins, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, and spirits. And those are usually the most popular TV shows and movies today. That's due to the influence of the mode of ignorance. When you're in the mode of passion, you take shelter of various demons. And according to the Bhagavad Gita, if you're in the mode of goodness, you take shelter of various demigods. So according to how the modes are influencing you, you will worship a particular deity, and you will apply the methodology that is required for pleasing that material deity. And that's why Krishna speaks rather disparagingly of the material position, of the position of the devatas. Those who are bhaktas, they take refuge in the Supreme Lord. Now, the modes of material nature will not inspire you to take shelter of the Supreme Lord. The modes of material nature don't give that inspiration. Even if you're being crushed by the material energy and you're suffering, it does not mean that suffering automatically leads to inquiry about the absolute truth. That is not a fact. The only time that suffering can lead to inquiry about the absolute truth is when it's in conjunction with contact of devotees, either in this life or previous lives. And the impressions that is left by such association, which is generally called as nitya sukriti or bhakti sukriti, means that in a particular life, this life or previous lives, there was association with devotees. That association leads a samskara, an impression in the mind. That impression is called as bhakti sukriti or nitya sukriti. And when there's a buildup of that nitya sukriti, then when there's crushing by the material energy, the modes of material nature, that crushing leads to the blossoming of inquiry about the absolute truth. Otherwise, if you're suffering without such sukriti, that doesn't lead to inquiry about the absolute truth. Krishna makes the same point in Bhagavad Gita when he says, Daiviyesha gunamai, mamamaya dharataya. This verse everyone knows. Mameva yepapadyante, mayamitam tarantite. He says the material energy is very hard, dharataya, practically insurmountable to overcome. But those who take shelter of me, they overcome it very easily. So then the question comes, why don't people take shelter of Vishnu? So then Krishna speaks the next verse. Namam dushkriti nam hudha. Prapadante, oh no, Muda, then Prapadante, Naradamaha, then Mayaya Prahitagana, Asuram Bhavamashita. He says, the reason people don't take shelter of me, even though it would be easy to cross over the material energy by doing so, is because they're all demons, basically. Dushkriti. They're impious fellows. And he's categorizes them. They're just grossly foolish. Grossly foolish means they're just interested in sense enjoyment. They're called mudas. So you go and talk to someone on the street, and mostly mudas, actually. Foolish, just foolish persons trying to enjoy sense gratification without much thoughtfulness. Just like I mentioned before when I would distribute books on Sankirtan. This is an example of foolishness. But I would distribute books on Sankirtan, and I would stop them and say, have you heard of yoga and meditation, self-realization? Yes, yes. I know yoga. And then I say, have you heard of self-realization? And they kind of look a little bit confused. And I say, self-realization means if I ask you, who are you, what will you say? Then they usually give their name. And you say, like, Joe. My name is Joe. And I say, Joe, if you change your name, does that mean you are a different person? They say, no. Then that means you haven't answered my question. So who are you? And then he says, Joe. I'm like, all right, we're taking donations for this. Okay, yeah. This is how foolishness. People are so grossly foolish and that they have practically no ability to think. So then their senses and mind are just carrying them away in the ocean of sense enjoyment. Then Krishna speaks about persons who are lowest of mankind. That means persons who have the opportunity to advance themselves transcendentally, spiritually, but they don't take advantage of that opportunity. Krishna, at least as Prabhupada's purport reads, these are the lowest of mankind, those who do not take advantage of the human form of life in terms of spiritual development, even though they have facility and opportunity to do so. Then there's what is the other two? Maya Pritagana, those whose knowledge is stolen by illusion. Illusory philosophies, either in the modern world in the form of existentialists or scientists trying to philosophize, or the Mayavadis of the Indic age, and so on. And then the Asuram Bhavam, those who are just atheists, no good reason at all, just having this very deep demoniac mentality. They don't take shelter of me because they're demons. So who takes shelter of you, Krishna? Chaturvida bhajante mam. Jana sukriti norjuna. Jana sukriti. Sukriti means those who are pious persons. They take shelter of me. What is that piety? According to Jiva Goswami, he says the sukriti is the piety, is the impressions created by a previous association with devotees. And that leads to 4 types of persons taking shelter of Krishna. Those who are materially distressed, those who are inquisitive, those who are, seeking material remuneration, and those who are wise. Having gained some association with devotees, and that association creating impressions, then those types of persons take shelter of me. So who is a devotee? Ultimately, a devotee means one who takes refuge in the Supreme Lord. And the ability to do so is because of contact with some Vaishnav, understand? Otherwise, the multi-material nature for which we're normally moving around this world will not lead you to the Supreme Lord. Only there has to be, the Supreme Lord has to lead you to the Supreme Lord. And the Bhakta, as well as the Guru, they are manifestations of the Supreme Lord who connects us to the Supreme Lord. So then it says here, Prabhupada saying here in the purport, that those who take refuge in the Lord, then the promise of the Lord is that they will never perish. Kontaya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashati. Those who take shelter in the Lord, this is not that Krishna is partial. Anyone who takes shelter of the Lord is called as a devotee. Even if he has a demon birth, if he's taken shelter of the Lord, then he is a devotee. Like Prahlad Maharaj, Vibhishana, these are examples of persons who are, externally speaking, demons, or Vitrasura coming up in a few chapters. Here are examples of demons, but they take refuge in the Lord, and so they're called as devotees. In fact, we'll hear in one of Prabhupada's purports later on, in the fight between Vitrasura and Indra, Vitrasura was actually the devotee, and Indra was actually the demon. Why? Because Vitrasura took shelter in the Lord, whereas Indra did not. So this is really the criteria of taking, being a devotee or not being a devotee. It's not so much externally, what is one's external activities. That doesn't mean that I'm sinning and grinning and I'm still a devotee of the Lord, but it means that it's really not determined by so many external criteria, but rather by how one is taking shelter of the Lord. So therefore, Krishna makes this point also in Gita, Api chet sudaracharo bhajate mama nanya bhak. Even if my devotee does the most abominable activity, because he takes refuge in me only, he should be considered a saintly person, despite that black spot on his report card, so to speak. He should be considered a devotee. So a devotee means one who takes refuge in the Lord. So anyone can become a devotee, just like when you're being burned by the sun. Example is given in the sixth canto coming up also. When you're being burned by the sun, then you take shelter of the shade, isn't it? It is not that the shade is partial to anyone. Anyone can take shelter of the shade and gain relief from the burning of the sun, isn't it? So if someone doesn't take shelter of the shade, then what happens? They continue to get burned, simple. So this is the situation in the material world, having not contacted devotees, having not gained the impressions which will lead to the inspiration to take shelter of the Lord. People continue to take shelter of material deities and get burned. Even if they take shelter of good deities like Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma, etc., Prabhupada is mentioning here, because it's under the influence of time factor, these deities as well. Krishna speaks of this in Gita also, Antava, what is that? Antava tupalam te sham tabhavati alpametasam. Whatever shelter that the deities can give you, whatever remuneration those deities can give you, alpametasam is short-lived, it's meager. Why is meager? Because eventually a time factor will destroy that shelter. And therefore, having not met devotees, having not taken shelter of the Supreme Lord, one continues to be burned by the material existence. The threefold miseries, the time factors, etc. But if one is fortunate to have contacted devotees and established that connection, then Krishna's promise is that such a person will never perish. He says such things to give one confidence to take shelter of him only. So here we see the Devatas have done that. The Devatas were being crushed by the demons, due to the demons having taken shelter of their Guru Shukracharya. So this verse is mentioning Surah Dushan Shriya Guptam, Oshanasya Api. Although Shukracharya, Oshanasya means here Shukracharya, although Shukracharya Guptam tried to protect the Shriyam, the opulences of the Devatas, the demons, Surah Dusham, although he was trying to protect them, he was not able to do so. Why he was not able to do so? Because the Devatas took shelter of Vishwarupa, and Vishwarupa connected them to Krishna. He gave them the Narayan Kavacha shield, the Vishnu mantra, which empowered them to win back all their opulences and some. In other words, having taken shelter of this Narayan Kavacha, this Vishnu mantra, which is not different from Krishna, they gain the power to conquer over the demons. Kontaya patijani name bhakta pranashati. If one takes shelter of Krishna, then he is assured of Krishna's protection. So that ends the chapter. The Devas receive the mercy of Vishwarupa. He gives them the Vishnu mantra. They become empowered to win back their opulences. And then with that Narayan Kavacha shield, we'll hear about in the next chapter. Are there any questions?
Hare Krishna. I have two questions. When we talk about Prabhupada's books to new people, we often stress this point about self-identity, understanding who you are. And I think for most people that usually translates as discovering who I am as another reconfiguration of product of the modes of nature. They don't really think of it as something separate from the modes of nature. And then, if you were to tell them, well, we're all spirit souls, we're all servants of Krishna, then it still to them is too homogeneous. It's like, oh, okay, they're looking for something unique, something special. Who am I? So how do we address this issue? Because to give them an identity based on the modes of nature is still not who they are, but and who they are might seem too like, well, that doesn't mean we're all the same, like we're all servants of Krishna, which we are obviously. But I don't know. Could you speak a little bit about this?
Well, I think getting people to understand that they're spirit souls is harder than just giving a class about it. And that's the ground for which their spiritual identity is going to sort of develop. In other words, even though they may have a homogeneous idea of self that's transcendental to the material nature, that's a good starting point for development of one's spiritual identity. Otherwise, the material concept of ourselves or the different configurations of the mental states and calling it ourself will continue. So they even have this sort of homogeneous idea, which I don't know if it's really exactly like that, but sort of this oneness idea, which is an idea transcendental to the material idea. That's a good ground for growth of the spiritual identity. As Prabhupada would often speak about in his books, Brahman realization is the first stage, and a person might actually come to that just by speculating about it. And then that can become the ground of a positive conception of personality. And Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we speak about the development of spiritual identity in relationship to Krishna's Braja Leelas. And the capacity to develop that does require spiritual grounding. So it does become sahaja, something cheap. And it's usually a process, it's one that's going to take time. So we can hardly expect anyone to very quickly understand that and be able to cultivate that and develop it. Um, So I think if you're saying new people is the context, dealing with new people, just trying to get them to understand the philosophy and how they're different from the mental states, especially, that's already a big enough challenge. And even when they say I'm a self different from matter, no, it's not. It's not like that. I mean, you see, any little thing can irritate them, and that means they're totally identifying with matter. So just to get them to understand that they're different from the body and the subtle body, also the mental state, is quite a challenge. So we start off with Bhagavad Gita, and even if they get a sort of impersonal idea of self, that could be a good starting point for spiritual conception of identity, especially in the Krishna consciousness movement, because all of our practices are in relationship to Krishna. And so even if they come to the point of some sort of homogeneous transcendent entity, but in the context of, or in, let's say, before the name of Krishna, before Krishna, that will soon develop further into a spiritual idea of self, especially as they start to hear about Krishna and his Braja Leelas and so on. So, okay. Then,
So you're making this beautiful point that because the demons, the demigods came in contact with Vishwarup, and so by that association they were able to take shelter of Krishna. So could you just explain why is it then if he's a devotee and he's able to connect them to Narayan through the Narayan Kavachra, why is he trying to also benefit the demons?
well, his
through
mom
his
was a
mom?
demon, and he's a devotee. So devotees are transcendental. They don't see demons and demigods. They see living entities. Prabhupada says that speaking of the great souls in the Ishopanishad, that they are not misled by material bodies, but attracted to the spirit soul within. So a devotee doesn't really see, I mean, like a very advanced devotee. If you're on a madhyam level, you make distinctions for keeping your consciousness a little peaceful. But when you're advanced, they don't see demigods and demons. They're as impartial as the Supreme Lord. And so anyone that takes shelter of them, they will assist, give some guidance, give some support like that. So there was no fault in the character of Vishwarupa. Indra misunderstood, even though he was told that he would be inclined towards the demons also, because his mom was a demon, Asura, so he has some natural affection there as well. Indra didn't like it, so he just cut off his head. We'll hear about that in a minute. The next chapter, I think. Luke wants to say something.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, bro. My question is related to the point you were just making that the most advanced devotees don't make such mundane distinctions, but they have this transcendental vision. So I was thinking of Krishna's instructions to Uddhava that he's delineating good qualities, bad qualities, and then finally advises that it's actually not good to be too absorbed in this conception of good and bad because that can become an impediment. So, of course, it makes sense that in the beginning of one's spiritual life, it's essential to make this kind of discrimination. How can one gradually give it up in a kind of like a mature way and come to that realization that, this is all Krishna's energy, so in the final analysis, it's perfect. And anyway, by what method are we to cultivate that vision?
Well, I think in practical terms, the discrimination takes place because of the vision of the individual. And the visions of individuals usually based on their knowledge, or we might use another word, their wisdom. So, in other words, I discriminate between bodies because I see different bodies. I'm seeing according to sense perception. And so I make such a discrimination. It might be racism, sexism, whatever it might be. Then when someone's knowledge increases, his vision changes oftentimes. So you get the wisdom or the knowledge that all entities are um, conscious and there's Satchitananda and all these things. And all of a sudden, your vision goes from racism and et cetera, which is simply based on sense perception, to seeing things based on Shabda Brahman. This is the way Prabhupada speaks about it in Isha Upanishad also, not seeing according to the naked eye, but seeing according to the Shabda Brahman, the sounds of the Shastras, the sounds of the Guru, you start to see in that way. And until that wisdom becomes deeply rooted in the heart, we find ourselves oscillating between the visions of things in this world. So sometimes it's mundane vision, sometimes it's really based on what we've heard, and we find ourselves oscillating. So then, when you come to the stage of Nishta, at least in our methodology, Nishta is like a state of like fixed absorption or fixed wisdom. Ekagra is a word used by Jiva Goswami. Ekagra means like fixed mind. So when the mind is really fixed in that wisdom and that knowledge, and he's not oscillating, which is due to anarthas, he's not oscillating between visions of things. At that time, we'll find that there will still be a discrimination in terms of the moral compass for devotees, which is the 6 principles of Sharanagati. This is favorable for my bhakti right now. This is not favorable. That discrimination will still be there. But the other forms of discrimination, at least as in the context in which I thought you were using it, amongst living entities and so on, will not be there because that Nisha platform is it's like a Brahmabhuta platform. Brahmabhuta platform means like fixed wisdom. Gan Nishta is a word used in chapter 2 Bhagavad Gita, where his Gan is Nishta, is fixed. It's not oscillating anymore. So at that time, that sort of discrimination will cease to take place. So it seems to me, from what I'm saying, that it's rather organic. Then when do we have to cease? It will cease naturally. If your wisdom is fixed like that, then you gradually move through these stages rather organically. And persons can try not to do so, which is commendable. But if their wisdom isn't fixed, they won't be able to sustain it, obviously. There will be oscillation at the very least. So then you just continue to try to make a spiritual advancement. Continue to try to. The word used is in the Bhagavatam also, Shrutidar. Shrutidar means one who can hold the Shruti. So that's mainly our problem is that we don't have hearts that hold the Shruti, the sound vibration. As soon as the sounds, if they even reach us, most of the time say they don't reach us, because the modes of nature are like martial artists, expert ninjas in the front of the door of our heart. So here comes the transcendental sound vibration to enlighten us and purify us. And the modes of nature, like, blocking so nothing can actually get in, and therefore everyone looks dull in the class because the sound vibrations didn't actually reach. If the vibrations happen to reach somehow or other, luckily, unfortunately, the jars in which we're to contain that sound vibration has these huge holes in them. So then as soon as it comes in, so you ask people, what did you get out of the class? Huh? Oh yeah, it was a good class. What was a good point? What was the point that you liked? Yeah. Yeah, you should worship Krishna. He wasn't talking about that. Oh, he wasn't? No, he must have been talking like that. You're not able to hold the sound vibration. When we're making spiritual advancement, then what happens is you can hold the Shruti. Such a person is called Shrutidara. It's a very beautiful verse in the 2nd canto, chapter 7. I think it's verse 49. I haven't quoted it in really like a long time. It's a beautiful verse speaking about surrender. And it speaks of the Shrutidar person. Anyway, one who can hold the Shruti. So when you can hold the Shruti, that means your wisdom will be fixed. Until that time, it's just like, spiritual practice, sadhana bhakti until we make advancement in Krishna consciousness. I see it all the time where devotees will speak really sentimentally towards each other. I mean, I think the gesture is nice also. It's, they may say things like, I love you, and I care for you profoundly, and, these sorts of things, which is very sweet. It's a sweet notion, actually. But then you see that this person's a narcissist come up, and then all of a sudden that same love is not being exhibited, or they want to immediately cut the relationship. This happens quite a bit, at least in my own personal experience, and also vicariously. So the point is that water always finds its natural level, so to speak. You can try to fake it with practice, a sort of like I'm going to try to apply singing in this way and so on. And I think that's commendable. That at least you want that for yourself. But then one has to actually make advancement to the point where he can hold the wisdom in his heart. At that time, he'll be able to um, look upon others without discrimination. Until then, the hills and valleys, a long road ahead is there usually. I don't know if that's the best I can do right now. Elish Prabhu wants to say something. It's only 8:05. Finished pretty early. 7:53. I was going for 7:45, but I didn't make it.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. When purification is intense, how devotee or what makes devotee shine with those 26 qualities that we hear in scriptures? What is it that makes those qualities shine? Because when purification is intense, the tendencies to run away or not address those issues.
What makes a quality shine when purification is intense is how strongly a devotee is able to take refuge in Krishna. Since Krishna Ekasharanam, surrender to Krishna is the primary quality of a devotee, and all those other qualities are just secondary qualities, that means that those qualities naturally ornament a person who is taking full refuge in Krishna. And therefore, Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we just discussed this, he mentions that qualities is not an anga of bhakti. Sometimes we think, I'll cultivate this quality or that quality and this quality to, help my bhakti. But Rupa Goswami says that qualities are not actually an anga of bhakti. They're the result of persons who are deeply taking shelter of Krishna. They're not angas of bhakti which will assist one's bhakti. Anga of bhakti means that which is going to advance your bhakti. So Rupa Goswami says qualities are not an anga of bhakti. They're the result of having taken shelter of Krishna. So what makes those qualities shine is our ability to take refuge in Krishna when we're being purified like that. Like when Mother Kunti is saying that may the calamities come again and again. Because by doing so, I'm able to remember you or take shelter in you. And so bring the calamities on. So when one is able to take refuge in Krishna, then he becomes ornamented with so many wonderful qualities. Otherwise, he doesn't. And so then usually our ability to take refuge in Krishna when we're being purified intensely depends on usually our sangha of devotees, because our tendency, like you said, is to run away. So you need someone to kind of like grab you by the sika, and if you don't have a sika, grab you by the neck, and say, put your head here. And just like sometimes you see in the temple room, the little kids that want to offer obeisances, and the parents are like, and the kid's like resisting, I'm not gonna do it, mom. Boom, and like push his head down. So similarly, we usually require the sangha of Vaishnavas to grab us by the sika or by the neck and say, put your head here at the lotus feet of Krishna. And we say, no, I want to do it in the modes of nature, and no, Krishna. And usually it's like that struggle is there. And if we are able to withstand or accept the mercy of Vaishnavas kind of trying to place us at the shelter of Krishna, then having taken refuge of Krishna, all good qualities manifest themselves. Otherwise, no good qualities manifest. If you don't take refuge in Krishna, then no good qualities manifest. That's my understanding of philosophy. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Shruti-dhara.
Right. Hare Krishna. So my question is about free will, and so if we're really under the modes of material nature and we don't really have free will because it's kind of the illusion of free will, what constitutes us coming from our conditioned kind of demoniac nature?
Yeah, free will.
And coming to Krishna consciousness, and what is the relation between the modes of material nature, its grasp on us, and our actual free will and ability to choose?
Well, in simple language, like the Vedanta Sutra dedicates a lot of discussion to this, because certain Indic schools do say we don't have any free will whatsoever. Just like the scientists, they also have such at least certain sort of scientists, those who believe in determinism, have such an idea. There's really no free will. It's just a material nature acting. And there were certain Indic schools who propagated the same thing. But the Vedanta Sutra makes several arguments. I think about 8. I can't remember all of them. But the first argument, which I found very compelling, is that if there was no free will, there could be no question of following the scriptural text. Because scriptural texts are addressing persons who have free volition. They can apply some free volition. And if you didn't have that, there would be no use of the instructions of the scriptures, because you can never follow them. And therefore, the fact that there are scriptures that give guidance what to do, what not to do, and so on, means that there is some volition there. There is some free will, free capacity. So when Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, ahankara vimundatma kartam, that the living entity foolishly thinks he is doing things, where actually everything is carried out by the modes of material nature. This point has to be tweaked. The idea here is that the living entity thinks he's the only factor in action in the material world. So this is the foolishness. He thinks that he's the only factor, that there are no other factors at play. But sometimes you'll find that Krishna says in the Gita that the soul is a doer. Sometimes he will speak of himself as a doer, the super soul, that is. So in the chapter 18 of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna kind of summarizes this topic of doership by saying there are 5 factors of doership in this world. There's the body itself is a factor, the endeavor is a factor, the jiva is a factor, and then ultimately the super soul. There's one other is there I'm missing. So there are many factors of doership in this material world. So when Krishna says he foolishly thinks himself a doer when everything is carried out by the modes of material nature, in context it means he thinks himself the only factor of doership. He doesn't recognize that there are other factors, like the fact that he's being influenced by the modes of nature, or the fact that he's being influenced by the type of body that he has, gross and subtle body that he has, and so on. He's not acknowledging these other factors. He thinks, I'm alone, I'm doing everything. I'm an independent doer. When he's not, he's actually being influenced by so many factors. So there is free will, but the free will in the material world is very minute. And if you don't come in contact with transcendental knowledge, then your free will remains manipulated by matter, just by dint of you not knowing that you're different from matter. So long as someone doesn't know he's different from matter, then matter continues to manipulate him. But as soon as a person knows that he's different from matter, at that time he can begin to exhibit some of his free will, some of his free volition. Otherwise, until then, it's almost like he doesn't have free will. But once he contacts transcendental knowledge, he begins to be able to exhibit that free volition, which is intrinsic to his nature. In other words, he can resist the manipulation of matter by transcendental knowledge. And therefore, he's able to apply the instructions of the sacred texts. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to apply them whatsoever. So when we hear those sorts of statements, it just means that a foolish, conditioned soul thinks himself the only factor. He doesn't acknowledge other factors in doership. He doesn't acknowledge super soul or the Supreme Lord. He doesn't acknowledge his body having maybe something to do with that. Just like someone says, I fall in love with someone, for example. Now, what is the factors that led to you falling in love? It's just coming from the heart. Okay, so this is called ahankara vimudatma. You totally diluted. There's so many factors that led to that. The type of body you have, your karma, super soul. There are many factors. So that's how we have to understand that.
Question. So does that free will that we have, does it emanate from the soul? Because the ego, intelligence, and all those things, those are material.
Yes, it is intrinsic to the soul.
All right.
Yeah.
And also, can you view it as like almost like a scale? Like at one spectrum, there's like the trees, with no sense of free will or conscious thought, self-aware thought. And then when you become human, you're like on the spectrum, and the more you have transcendental knowledge, the more free will you actually have.
Yes, you can view it in terms of that spectrum. So that's what I mentioned in the class also, like fire covered by smoke.
Right.
Fire covered by smoke means the situation is still severe. So you have a human form of body, but you're still completely manipulated by matter, just like the trees and the animals and so on. And yes, and to the degree that you become invested with transcendental knowledge, to that degree, one is able to start to exhibit some of his free will. And of course, in the spiritual world, it's complete freedom. So like you have Narada Muni who's just flying around the universe. That's pretty free. You can just, no need for visa, no need for all these things. It just pops up anywhere, back and forth to Vaikuntha. Okay, I'm going to Vaikuntha today, and goes there and comes back to them. That's the extent of freedom that the entities in the spiritual world have. Just like they want to serve Krishna in a different way, they can just manifest forms to serve Krishna in that way. It's described like this in the spiritual world. They can expand their forms, even they can change their forms in order to serve Krishna. If we want to serve Krishna, we're like, Krishna, this is all I got, and I can do a few things for you. I hope you were satisfied with that. I try to do it with devotion. But in the spiritual world, when they want to serve Krishna, they can just change their form and become Krishna's seat or his shoes or his flute even. They have all these things have personified, these paraphernalia of Krishna, they all have their personified forms. So even like Krishna's conch shell, his gada club, they all have their personified forms. They can change forms. So you have on the highest end of the spectrum, it's like complete freedom to serve Krishna. And that's what it means to have free will in the spiritual world. It's just they freely serving Krishna. And then on the bottom of the spectrum, you're just completely under control of material nature because you think you matter. So we need knowledge. Okay, I think, is anything over here? No, I mean, before. No. All right, I think I saw Luke's hand first, and then he has an addition. It's amazing I finished so early still.
Hare Krishna. Sometimes, and I used to have this impression, I think it comes from like a more impersonal schools, but that spiritual life means to suppress your desire. And also we kind of get this impression maybe from like a incomplete understanding of the principle of subordinating our personal desire to the desire of the guru or to a spiritual authority or some kind of hierarchical system. Subordinating our desire. Based on your discussion just now, could we say that real spiritual life, it begins when we engage our desire, utilize our desire for the pleasure of Krishna, for the pleasure of his devotees?
Yeah, we can say like that. It's like a starting point. Usually we use the word dovetailing.
Okay.
Karma yoga.
But so really, like, is suppression required to some degree? What is it that we're suppressing, and then what are we actually?
Well, I don't exactly use the word suppress, but you have certain desires that are very hard to engage, like sex desire. So then, to some degree, someone might express it as suppressing. Even if you're a grihasta, the way we follow in ISKCON is like, for me, it seems like a kind of suffering. I mean, because you cannot even and Brahmananda only told this also, because Srila Prabhupada was describing the whole process that when you're married and you have children, then if the wife gets pregnant, then after she gives birth, you cannot have sex again for another year and a half or something like that. And then you can try for the second child. And only for children you can also have sex. So how many children you want? How many children you want? 10? So you only want 1 or 2 children. And then after the wife bears one child, they have to wait for 16 months, I think was the time period. So then Brahmananda Prabhu, I think at the time, he said, Srila Prabhupada, then what's the point? And Srila Prabhupada said, exactly. It's like a kind of suffering. At least the way we kind of apply it in ISKCON also, at least we try to seriously inculcate this understanding in the members. So I can imagine that the word suppress could be used in a certain context, that people who are proper grihastas or brahmacharis who have sex desire, they are to some degree suppressing their desires. And I might use the word they're trying to sublimate that energy and Krishna consciousness. So instead of using that energy for sex life, using that energy for serving Krishna, or jogging. Get it out somehow. So you might use the word sublimate rather than suppress. Otherwise, to some degree, there is like a suppression of certain desires that are really, you can't engage so much. You might have the desire to hurt someone violently. So, and there are devotees like this. I remember one of my our friend, devotee here, Maharaj Chaitanya Jr., he was telling us about one of his godbrothers who was like a criminal in Africa, like a known criminal. He later on took initiation from one of our devotees in ISKCON. And when he he made an offering to his guru. This was his offering. It was, I mean, in a certain sense, it was sweet, but it was his offering. He said, when people don't show you proper respect, I could just kill them. And for him, that's like a reality because he was actually killing people before. And I think, it was taken as a sweet expression, but for him, but obviously that's the type of desire you kind of have to suppress a little bit. You can't go around killing people every time they disrespect your guru or something. You want to disrespect my guru and you just like cut his throat or something like that. So, and to some degree, there is suppression of certain desires, I would say. But we try to supplement our desired nature in the services of Krishna. And at least that's the beginning until we become bewitched by Krishna's all attractiveness. At that time, all our desires will be desires to just satisfy Krishna. That way, you don't have to apply sublimation and so on. But I think in a certain context, someone could use the word suppress. I think there is some degree of suppression that we do use in order to try to cultivate Krishna consciousness. Now, someone may say that's psychologically unhealthy. You're suppressing, but it has its health. Just like using the homicidal example, it has its place. But it's not like we're focusing on, oh my God, I'm just suppressing. We have positive engagement to try to balance it out like that. Yeah.
Really, the only evidence or sign of the expression of free will is to the degree that the soul wants to come in contact with Krishna.
Yeah, to the degree he's contacting transcendence, to that degree he exhibits freedom. Otherwise, there is no freedom. There's no question of freedom.
I also had a clarification about something you said earlier. You were making this point that qualities are not an anga of bhakti. And the way I understood it was that you're making this point because sometimes people think that, just being nice or just being, compassionate that's devotional service. So I wanted to get clarification. So yesterday we had this conversation about the importance of being straightforward. And that seems like an important quality to have because if you're straightforward with devotees, then you will make offenses and you can be more you can get honest feedback from them. So then taking shelter of that, okay, let me be straightforward for the sake of improving my devotional service. So where is the room for trying to cultivate good qualities as a means versus thinking that's the end and all and be all?
Well, it's not a means, it's not the end all be all either. As I expressed in my statement, it's a byproduct of surrender to Krishna. The more one becomes deep, the more one takes refuge in Krishna, the more these qualities begin to exhibit themselves in a natural sort of way. What is a place for being mindful of qualities and so on? Because just like we hear in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 17, about the austerities of the mind. So one of the austerities of the mind is simplicity or freedom from duplicity. In other words, if one could say, if one isn't mindful of certain things, suppose he's being duplicitous all the time and so on, that creates obstacles in the mental state. And because we're identifying with the body, if there's a disturbance in the mental state that is too powerful, that can directly impact our Krishna consciousness. So in that sense, you might say that we try to be mindful of qualities, like trying to exhibit proper qualities, because it helps the mental states, which will help our yoga. Krishna says that one has to elevate himself with the help of his mind, and not degrade himself. So the mind is a factor in our elevation from the arukshu stage or beginning stage to the advanced stage. So in that degree, in that context, being mindful of being just like I was joking around with Luke one day. I was like in a really silly mood one week, and everything I was just making all sorts of proudful jokes in jest, but it was in jest, and Luke was kind of playing along with me. And I said we should stop. It's not good because what's going to happen is that these jokes are going to start shaping the mental states in that way, and before you know it becomes from a joke to something you actually really mean and imperceptibly, and that will create a tremendous obstacle in our spiritual development. So in that context, being mindful of the qualities are helpful for controlling the mental states, and we need the help of our mind for further development. But it doesn't follow that by having a proper mental state with good qualities being exhibited and so on, that your bhakti is growing. Your bhakti grows by shravanam, kirtanam, smaranam, and so on. So that's Rupa Goswami's point. And then he makes a point, he follows it up by saying, Or Prabhupada's purport discusses, just like a devotee is naturally a vegetarian and non-violent, but a vegetarian and a non-violent person isn't necessarily a devotee. So this is Prabhupada's simple logic. That if you're a devotee, you will be vegetarian, you will be non-violent. In other words, good qualities will be coming out to the degree you are a devotee. And if you're a vegetarian and you're non-violent, doesn't mean you're a devotee. So that, in other words, it's not an anga of bhakti. And also conversely, you'll see certain devotees who do have bad qualities, but they could still be making advancement in Krishna consciousness because they're hearing and chanting, and that's possible. And then as they advance further, then those qualities start to come out all of a sudden. So in this way, Rupa Goswami mentions this point. Okay, anything final? Okay.
One devotee asked me, it's related because the use of free will is there. Um, we have a certain free will, and then the question was, how do we not become controllers?
How do we not become controllers?
Like in a practical sense of a situation, but because we exert a certain kind of controllership over the situation and perform certain duties, but then how not to become a controller in those circumstances?
Well, there are certain factors one may ask in a question like that. Like one factor would be, what's your service? Another factor is you can be exhibiting some level of control without thinking yourself a controller. That's possible. In other words, the sense of being a controller is really a kind of like a mental state or a state of consciousness. So like Parashit Maharaj, for example, he was emperor of the whole planet, but he didn't think himself as such. He thought himself as servant of Krishna, and here's his service he has to do. So in that scene where he asks Dharani, who has done this to you, the cow, who has done this to you, and she starts philosophizing, who can say, okay, is it this one, is it that one? And Parashit Maharaj said, yes, you are definitely the personified Dharma, but then he took actions into his own hand. Why? Because that was his service. So, I would probably put forward the question, well, what is one's service, And in that service, there might need to be an exhibition of some amount of control. That can be done without considering oneself a controller. Although such a position is certainly more challenging, Lord Brahma himself is a little concerned that I'm creating a universe. That's pretty impressive, to be able to create a whole cosmos. So may I not become overcome by pride and the sense of controllership that leads to that. So undoubtedly, to be in such a position where you have to exhibit control as a service, it could be dangerous in the sense that you may start to actually think yourself a controller. But one can have some exhibition of control, and we do have to some degree. We have control of our bodies and so on, without thinking oneself a controller. And Krishna, again, water always finds its right level, so Krishna always helps out also. Because the reality of the situation is that no one's really in control of anything. And we may forget that on account of being intoxicated by some amount of influence that we have. And Krishna can help bring that to the right level. And then all of a sudden, all the person you're supposed to control rebel against you. They start a revolution. And then you realize, I'm just chanting Hare Krishna. I don't have any control of the situation. So in that way, I would reconcile the situation. It's not like, oh, I'm scared that I have controllership there. You can have your services there. You have to tell someone what to do and so on. It can be done without false ego also, although it might be a challenge. Okay, then. You just change your booth, and then he'll say something.
You were relating about this one devotee who would kill people. There was this thing that took place here in Chicago, talking about the lower modes of nature, which is pretty predominant here. But when they had the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, 120 years ago, there was this doctor, and he constructed this building, and he had all kinds of torture chambers, and he was said to kill over 200 people. He would kill tourists that were coming to the Chicago's World's Fair. And then they caught him, and they asked him, they said, well, why are you doing these things? And he says, well, for me, killing people is like writing poetry to some other people. So, and then I was thinking, we say, please come to Krishna consciousness. Certain restrictions may apply. And
like, don't kill people.
So like Srila Prabhupada, he says, I can do this, but you can't. And so certain liberties are given to people because we know they're not going to abuse it. So we have to, until we become advanced, we have to curtail our lower natures in order to, understand the whole situation. So I don't know, this is just kind of a parallel, everybody acts according to their nature in which they have acquired. So I don't know, it just came to my mind. I thought it was relevant to our discussion here.
Yeah, the suppression one.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. All right, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.